Hi, everybody, and happy 2026. If you've been with us for a while now, you know my intro, but I'm going to do it again for those of you that have not joined us before. So, I am Dayna Lauer. I am half of the co-founding team at Project Arc, and many of you know me from my work in project-based learning and trying to push it into a more authentic space so that our students can affect change in their world. And in fact, the ARC in Project ARC stands for Authenticity, Relevancy, and Community Connected Learning. And for the past 20 plus years, this work has really been my passion and it's been my journey. And it's mostly been rewarding, but I will say it has been bumpy at times. And occasionally I've been labeled as being disagreeable in education. So in November of 2024, I put out a call on LinkedIn to connect with me if you also considered yourself to be disagreeable in the education space. And this post was really prompted by a quote from Adam Grant's New York Times bestseller, Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know. So I'm going to read that quote to you real quickly here. It says, the ideal members of a challenge network are disagreeable because they're fearless about questioning the way things have always been done and holding us accountable for thinking again. There's evidence that disagreeable people speak up more frequently, especially when leaders aren't receptive, and foster more task conflict. They give the critical feedback we might not want to hear, but need to hear. So November of 2024, I had no idea what DIST would turn into. And in fact, I have no idea what our guests are going to say as our conversation unfolds over the next half hour or so. Hopefully, there will be some disagreements as we engage in conversation. But I'm going to add a little disclaimer here that our guests' viewpoints don't necessarily reflect that of Project Arc because, heck, we don't know what they're going to say. Instead, Tim and I are really here to learn because we want to grow as we think again.
All right. Well, thank you for that intro, Dayna. I'm Tim Kubik, the other co-partner and co-founder at Project Arc. I was basically labeled disagreeable as a toddler and grew up that way. And if you know anything about history, the name Kubik is Czech for James or Jacob, which makes me a Jacobin, and I'm, kind of a dissenter politically. So I'm really excited to have our two guests on tonight. One of them, Kendra Vair, I've known for quite a long time, and the other, Jessie, I've heard a lot about from Dayna as we've been working on various things over the last couple of years. And I'd like to invite Jessie to kick us off and just share a dis word that you think describes a way that maybe teachers and learners are being dissed in the education system right now.
Yeah,
And you
if
can
I could
introduce
go a
yourself
little
too.
bit.
Yeah, you can introduce yourself
Oh,
too.
yes, of course. Let me introduce myself. You'll hear about my opinions later. My name is Jessie. It's nice to meet you, Tim, and you, Kendra, and Dayna and I work together on PAECT, which is a Pennsylvania Teachers Volunteer Association, where we're driving hard for improved teacher training and, of course, teacher involvement in their own careers and the direction of education in general in the state of Pennsylvania. Previously, I was a special education teacher and administrator for about 17 or so years, and my passion and expertise was working with children and families with autism and emotional disturbance. And this is what was my segue into educational technology because we really leaned into
Mhm.
the valuable supports that educational technology could provide us in serving our students and our families. And now I work for National Geographic Learning, and I make sure those supports find their ways into their social studies and STEM courses. And that's me. Can I share my
Yeah, how
dis
about your dis
word
word? Yeah.
now? So I'd like to take it a little broader than just the teachers and the students because I think disassociation is going to be an important topic, n now until the next school year, because I know there is now that I work on a national stage
Mhm.
and I can get opinions of teachers all over the country. I am seeing such a public dissatisfaction in public school as a whole, and that dissatisfaction drives a disassociation of teachers and students from one another, from families and
Mhm.
communities, from the goals of their public schools. And this has some fairly, dire consequences. And, I am hopeful, however, that with folks like us, who are working away in the trenches in education, that we can kind of help bring those folks back together who need each other the most. But I would say my word would definitely be disassociation.
Yeah, and I like the way you brought that together, drawing it a little bit deeper into the dissatisfaction that a lot of people are expressing about education. Kendra, how about you? Where would you take us with a yourself, like your background, your experience, and then the dis word that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I got to give you some credibility. I know that speaking with students, like they need to know where my street cred comes from. So I've been a public educator for 28 years. So I can totally connect with what Jessie just said about this like shift with dissatisfaction. And nothing grinds my gears more than someone from the outside saying something on the inside is not good and they've not been in the inside. So, so public educator for 28 years. My heart is with the underdogs. So kids that people think can't learn or won't learn, or they never have learned, just because they haven't had any access or agency, or no one's really like added or like filled their bucket. So, which kind of brings me to my word, which is disposable. I kind of thought about it in terms of like what would be on the other side. So if the dis word is what I maybe what I'm seeing or what I want to like challenge in public education, the positive side would be like instead of students being disposable or adult or teachers being disposable or communities, I think that we're forgetting to see how deserving and essential teachers and students are. So there's two sides to it. So if I'm, putting them that they're disposable, but I think the reason why maybe the community or students think they're disposable or teachers think that certain students are disposable is because they haven't been able to see how deserving and essential they are because they've been unheard, their curiosity has been stifled, they have been disconnected from opportunities and learning, and they just haven't had that right place or person to make them feel like they're deserving and essential. So it goes along with what Jessie was saying. I think we just look at things negatively instead of seeing maybe like what they're lacking. And so I would say to Jessie's word, what they're lacking is like an awareness or an education or a conversation. And I think what disposable students, because I see them thrown away all the time, that's when they
Mhm.
land in my lap. But they're not disposable, right? They're just, their potential hasn't been tapped yet. And that's a learning thing, a learning curve for them, their families, other adults who kind of, let them go by the wayside. When you have a classroom of 40 kids and there's a kid on their phone or their computer the whole time, it's easy to ignore them because they're not making any problems, but they're also not learning. So
Mhm.
that seems really disposable to me. And it's sad because they start believing that in themselves. So
Mhm.
that's my word.
Jesse, you want to jump on that right away, or do you want me to play with it a little bit?
No, go ahead, Tim. I'd be curious to hear your insights,
Yeah, so
especially about disposable students and
well,
teachers.
but I want to go like first to your word about dissatisfaction at the root of the disassociation, because I also think the dissatisfaction is the root of the disposability that we have, right? Um, because I hear a lot of dissatisfaction when ever since the pandemic, I hear teachers saying, "Oh, these kids today, right? Like they just don't do anything. The teachers are very dissatisfied with the kids, right? And so that leads to an attitude of disposability, right? Like, well, if these kids aren't even going to try, I'm just going to forget them, right? And I hear a lot of learners saying the same thing, like my teachers are still doing the same things they did before the pandemic, and like the world is different, right? And they don't understand, that we're in this digital space. But what I think, and I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but Kendra, as you're talking about the two sides of disposable, um, yes, a lot of us have these attitudes that people are disposable now, but there's also this attitude of disservice. Like when we have this satisfaction and we get down on each other, right? And I want to distinguish disservice from being disagreeable, because disagreeable is like, no, I want you to think about what we need to do to reach those underdogs or those kids with special needs, right? As opposed to thinking of them as disposable, right? Like we're doing a disservice to people when we focus on the dissatisfaction, right? Is kind of what I wanted to jump into. And Kendra, I know that's not what you said. Oh, and you got a really cute puppy. Um, I know that's not what you said, but it's what I'm like feeling when you're talking about that flip side of disposable is like, are students and teachers doing a disservice to each other because they're blaming each other for what's not working in education and their dissatisfaction rather than seeing it, and Dayna, feel free to jump in here if you want to, as a problem that we could tackle together and try to figure out
Yeah.
how, like, anybody want to jump in on that question? Like, instead of dissing on each other, can we be disagreeable about trying to talk about ways we can solve the problem?
And I'm just going to throw out the question that I wrote down,
Hmm.
was what we're teaching considered to be disposable by students?
Ah, good. Yeah.
And I would say two of my other, because I was like writing down several dis words, because I play by the rules, so I'd like to be prepared for this podcast. So I had two other words which were disinterested and disconnected, and I think, Dayna, that goes right along with you. Like, are we even like teaching through a lens that kids care about, or like what? Like, have we tapped into who they are? Have we figured out what brings families together? Have we like, if you aren't tapped into the curious, unheard, and unlearning of the students, then to Tim's point, like you're not even trying to solve the problem. You're just dissing on the system or dissing on the kid. It's really easy to say a kid can't learn because they haven't turned in 25 worksheets. But the hard part is finding a way to engage with them by showing them that you care, like about their hair, So I think that the solution and the challenge is more simple than we think, because we're just not even like, we're doing things that they don't care about, and we're saying, but this is how you have to learn, instead of rethinking about what we're even teaching. So once again, we're making it about adult centered instead of student centered, but that's a different podcast. But
Yeah.
that's what I think. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know,
Jessie,
Kendra, as you
thoughts?
were talking, yeah, I was going to say, Kendra, as you were talking, it just reminded me of something I learned early on in my training as an educator, especially entering specifically, into exceptional student education or in special education,
Mhm.
because folks who take that route. Now, listen, I haven't been in a teacher prep program in a couple of years, so this could have changed. but for folks who were going specifically into a special education or exceptional student education, we had an awful lot of courses to take that were rooted in civil rights activism in court cases, which opened the door and allowed folks like me and the folks that I serve to enter into these public spaces and receive education. And so by doing that, the fact that at that time, they were asking all of us in our teacher prep program to really educate ourselves about how rooted our practice was going to be in civil rights and activism. They also were able to train us in a sense that teaching, and I think this has also broadened over the years, has become a subversive activity, because you bring with you a belief that Not just your actions can change things, but that humans can learn, humans can change. You have
Mhm.
hope, that things can move forward, even in the face of the dissatisfaction, even in the face of all of this disassociation. That's crazy, but that's also a subversive act. And as teachers, you got to have a really, really good crap detector, because over time, for lack of a better word, over time, all systems, not just education, but all systems, they are the victim of entropy. And what I mean by that is that, entropy, over time, something, if it keeps just spinning in space, it becomes useless and falls into chaos.
Right.
And it keeps from doing that with appropriate and timely feedback. So you get teachers who have really great crap detectors or data collection, to
Mhm.
monitor very carefully and then provide that helpful feedback at important points in order to keep the system moving forward, meaning the learning itself moving forward rather than kind of falling into chaos. Now, keep in mind too, the students that we had served traditionally, the stakes were a little higher if they got angry with a math problem. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah,
So,
exactly.
but Kendra, as you were talking, I just kept thinking in my head, teaching is a subversive activity. It's an act of activism, an act of hope, which is kind
Yeah.
of crazy, in our current environment. But
You want to run
that's
with
what I'm
that,
thinking in my
Kendra?
brain.
Yeah, because I think that that's what like fires me up. And I think, there's all this stuff about like who works, like, why do, you don't, only the most dedicated teachers think that the job is hard, right? And I think about that a lot because it's also like what you mean by defining hard, right? Like I could get up and talk about anything in front of kids all day, but making it relevant and relatable and something that they care about. I mean, I teach English. Like we're not going back into all the classics because they care about it to a certain extent, but let's be honest, they want to see themselves and stuff. So to your point about activism, it also gets them fired up. So like we read books that are controversial and sticky and messy.
Hmm.
And when we talk about your word too, Jessie, about just like the community, like kind of like feeling disconnected or students feeling like that dissatisfaction, I think that teachers who really connect with their students, we're not teaching things like as the public and the community wants it to be taught because that's not how they see students learning, right? So a lot of us are just stuck in our own way. And I think that leads to let's just plow through it and just get this done or move through. But in the
Hmm.
process, you're not making any change. You're not shaping young minds. You're not making the community understand what you're doing. So, as controversial as I teach, the fact that the families that I serve trust me gives me the power to do that and to make change. But it goes back to everything about they need to feel deserving, they need to feel essential, they need to
Hmm.
feel important. And I think what we're missing right now is that communities don't feel like that, whether it's because of COVID, because they couldn't come in, or because they're really, really busy, or because they speak Spanish and can't communicate, or perhaps they dropped out and school is a scary and terrifying place for them. Um, this lack of communication or cohesion, I think it comes down to the messages being blurred between my desire to connect with kids where they are and kids' desire to learn where they are and community not understanding why that's so important.
Yeah, and I
That's a lot
like
of
that, Kendra,
words
because I
to
think
say
that
what I
loops
was
us
saying, but
back into Jesse's word of disassociation, right? Like I do think, Jesse discussed the separation between teachers and learners in that dissociation, but there's also a really big separation between uh, educators and families, educators and the community, right? And again, that stems from a lot of uh, disservice or dissatisfaction that we throw towards each other in those roles, right? Like, what's wrong with parents today? They don't make kids do what they need to do to learn, and same with parents saying, what's wrong with schools today, right? They're more focused on these things rather than on the things that we had to think about when we were kids, and of course, the world is significantly different than it was 50 years ago, right? But it makes me think of going back to, I think at the heart of it is kind of what Dayna said, right? Is that learners think that what we're teaching is disposable, right? That it doesn't have a whole lot of value or cachet. And you touched on that too a little bit, Kendra, in that like they know that that classic stuff that we used to teach, right? Like has less and less cachet in the adult world. All they have to do is turn on the news, right? Like nobody talks about Shakespeare or um, the concert of Europe or that kind of stuff on the news the way they used to. It's all very current and very contemporary, and it changes rapidly, right? So that we may also be dealing, I wish our guest from last fall was here, Stephanie Fay, like we may be able dealing with some disassociation on our own part for being able to get traction on the way what we're trying to teach, what we're trying to learn connects to the world that's going on around us. And that leads to some
Tim,
of this
this
revolutionary
has
stuff
got
you're
to be a
talking about.
lead in. This has got to be a lead in to you guys. Enter Project Arc.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean,
Yes.
go say some more, right?
Well,
I'm not trying to lead
having
us
the
that way, but
opportunity. Hey, totally not on purpose. This did
no.
not happen on purpose. But, having the opportunity to provide information, lessons, experiences in the classroom that are meaningful and rooted in not just the student needs or student interests, but also something that is of a relevant need
Hmm.
too. You got to answer the question, why do I have to know this? Maybe they're interested in it, maybe it is a fun activity to do, but if there really isn't any like relevant meaning to it, it just kind of falls flat. And I think what's so beautiful, if I could be the commercial here
Hmm.
for the work that you all do, what I think is so beautiful about the services you provide is that you basically give that gift, you give that blessing to educators because a lot of educators out there aren't quite sure how to get started if they haven't started. And if they have started, again, we're kind of running into that entropy. Things do get busy. I mean, there are a lot of other pressures out there on
Oh
teachers than
yeah.
just, hey, let's
Yeah.
make sure we deliver service. You provide an eagle eye to say, hey, can you give me some feedback? How am I doing here with this process or with this procedure? With this project-based learning. And I will say this, and I will say too that it applies to pretty much every service industry, but especially in education because that's our experience. And I know
Mhm.
Kendra, I'm sure you'll agree that the strength of our educational system, I believe, is proportional to the mental health of the practitioners in it.
Hmm.
Not just teachers. I think parents are practitioners too. They gotta help.
Yeah.
They're supporting too. And so the strength of the system is proportional to their mental health, and it's greatly impacted by the degree that people like me who work with curriculum and publishers and folks like you all, like the degree to the support we can give them in that
Yeah.
system. And I am curious about that. I'm curious about those of us who have decided to stay in education when so
Hmm.
many folks have decided to leave. And I'm so curious about the support that we want to continue to provide. So the mental health for the folks who are engaging in the system, at least, I don't want to say improves. I don't want to set the bar too high, but
Yeah.
at least stays, it stays as well supported as possible.
Some great directions there, Dana or Kendra.
Now, I was just going to say, one of the conversations that I've frequently had with principals, administrators that are a little bit disagreeable in terms of what should be done and how teachers should be trained. Like, wait, why are you doing it that way? I just want you to tell them to do this, or just tell me how to do that. But, I always say to those admins, well, these teachers are my learners. They're just bigger learners. They're adult learners.
Mhm.
And when we think about our teachers, are they, and I know Jessie, you and I are on the same page because we struggle with this in our PD committee for PAECT and how to get teachers involved across the state. But we find that teachers are disinterested, disassociating with any kind of professional learning. They are dissatisfied in many, many ways, and they just see those credit hours that they have to take as, this is something that's disposable that I have to throw away. I'm just doing it because I have to do it. And so if we think about our teachers as our learners, and how can we get that kind of trickle down effect to happen as we work with them and then have them work with their learners at the same time. And that's just kind of where my brain is going in this conversation.
Yeah,
Can I
yeah,
chime in? Well, go ahead,
because you
Tim.
did a great job on that, Kendra. So go.
I think I also teach and train a lot of teachers, and I think that I want my learning to also be engaging, right? And I
Mhm.
think what often happens with educators is, well, they're the worst learners. I'm just going to put that out there. They
That's pretty
they
disagreeable, but we
text
won't
each
disagree
other.
with you.
They are on their computer. They don't have supplies. They're late coming back from a break. And I will call them out a million times and be like, I
Mhm.
noticed y'all came back late, but like, how would you deal with that? I hope you're cool if kids come back late from lunch. Like, I hope you're not like handing out tardies, because we all are human or whatever, but we
Mhm.
are the worst learners. And so y'all have like this group who thinks, good or bad, that they're really good at their craft, because teaching is a craft.
Mhm.
Lesson planning is my jam. I will take, you give me anything in the world and I'm going to find a way to make it relevant to kids. If it's Shakespeare, I can make it relevant, because
Sure.
that's all the kids care about is the relevancy, right? And so when you start with educators, you just have to remind them that they are learners in a space, and that their behavior is reflecting on the behaviors of their students, right? Like, I'm going to come back on time to PD. I'm always going to be prepared, and I'm going to
Mhm.
stay off my electronics, because that drives me crazy. So I'm going to honor that, right?
Kendra, you've got such good craft detection. Like, that's timely, important feedback.
Yeah.
That is so important
But I
to
call
keep
them
the
out.
system moving. Yeah.
And I'll always say, like, I'm leading this, and people will come in that I know, and I'll be like, I know y'all came back late from lunch, and I hope when kids come back late from lunch, you don't call them out, you don't make them feel stupid, because like, you're late, like you have bad behavior too, because we're all humans. But I'm digressing. The point is, if you can get a teacher to engage, you have met the mark, because
Mhm.
we're jaded, just like you said, like, I need to grade 1,000,000 papers. I need to do this, that, and the other. But teachers work way too hard for what they need to do, and they just need to find purpose within themselves. And so, although when you're at a PD and you're talking about like, what's one thing you hope you learned today, you have to reframe that. And it's like, what are you going to use when you leave tomorrow? Teachers
Mhm.
need to know the one thing you're making a promise. I promise, out of the 10 things I'm going to talk about today, you'll be able to use one thing tomorrow. It's like with kids.
Mhm.
I promise today, when I talk to y'all about literary devices, there's a reason for that. And it's because you all watch movies, listen to songs, and read books, and authors work really hard at keeping you engaged. And if you watch a movie and you're like, this is meh, they did not meet the mark. And so we're going to bring your term, Jessie, our crap detectors are up, and we're going to be like, this author did not meet my needs because of X, Y, and Z, or this author had me on the edge of my seat. And that is a craft. And that's why you listen to Spotify. And that's why you watch all the Netflix. That's why you binge Stranger
Mhm.
Things, because those authors are tapped in. So if I just stood up and was like, let's define a bunch of literary terms, kids are going to be like, girl,
Yeah.
no. Just like if you're in a PD with staff and you're like, today I'm going to teach you about how you can engage students in an authentic way. No way. You got to make it to them. Like, this is why you should care. And I promise you, when you leave today, you get to try something, but you have to just speak their language, whatever room you're in. And if you're not changing your audience, then you are missing the mark, and you're creating disposable learners, dissatisfaction, disengaged. Same
Mhm.
with adults, parents have to trust you. I love that Jim Fay, Love and Logic. I'm a big Love and Logic lover, but he always talked about, like, if you're not putting money into anybody's personal piggy bank, never ask for anything from them. And so every time I send a positive email or tell a kid I like their shoes, I'm investing into their personal piggy bank.
Mhm.
And so when I ask them to do something for me, like, yo, put away your cell phone, there's not a disagreement, because I've invested in them. But I think that as a society, we're not putting enough money into anybody's piggy bank. We're not putting money into our community's piggy bank.
Yeah.
We're not putting money into our family's piggy banks. And then we're asking for all this stuff. And no wonder everyone's turning their heads. But there's just no investment. And I think part of it is people are scared to, but also they just don't have the skills. Teachers are doing the best that they can, but teachers are also afraid to say that they don't know what they're doing. I don't know how to lesson plan, but you're a teacher, right? Like that seems,
Well, and
discongruent because
I think Kendra, increasingly, it's also a question of permission. They may not know, or it may not be that they don't know what to do, but like we have so many people at our workshop say, "Oh, I always wanted to teach this way, but I didn't know I was allowed to." Right. And I was like, well, who the heck was stopping you? Right. You can do whatever you want. And as you're both talking, right? Like we've got two, they're not dis words, they're C words that are coming up that I think are kind of interesting as we think about them, right? This this shift between craft and crap, right? And I think it's the dissociation that leads us to doing a lot of crap, right? Rather than focusing on craft. And Kendra, I just have to say, I love that you used the word investment, because I have a few crusades in education, but eliminating the word buy-in from education and replacing it with investment is one of them, because I think they're different things, right? And I do think we have to be invested in our kids' futures, not just bought into the latest district initiatives. Um, so those are some sort of summary things moving us around. But I do want to go back to something I said before you started speaking, Kendra, that I think is really important, right? And I know it's true of Dayna, because I've worked with Dayna for dozens of years. I just met you tonight, Jessie, but I have a feeling it's true about you also, right? Is that because you said it, when we choose to focus on our craft and what we're doing, right, with kids and other teachers, and prioritize that, like we don't dissociate. It's when we start focusing on just doing all the crap that we have to do because we've lost the passion or the reason, or the purpose or the passion or the reason for doing the work, that we check out. And I just have to say, and then I'll stop, is that, Kendra, that's something you reignited in me years ago when you shared with me that you had a motto in your classroom was, if kids can do it, I don't. Right? I don't know if you remember saying that. It was a long time ago, but I remember you saying it, and I've shared that in so many schools around the world over the years since we worked together, right? Like, this is what it means to be invested in your kids, right? Is giving them the opportunity to show what they can do rather than dissing on them and making an assumption they can't. So a lot of things to play with there, but as we start to wrap up the conversation, I'm curious, whether it's your thoughts about craft or crap, whether it's your thoughts about investing in kids, like where do we want to go with our wrap up?
It's off topic. What can I
It's okay.
say, Tim?
It's okay.
I'm a former teacher of a terrible student. You give a direction, look at me. But I will say, as you were talking, that there was an idea came to me. It was very inspired. And it had to do with crap and craft.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I have a viewport into a national stage, I can see the type of federal oversight and the policy turbulence that education just as a whole, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
talking about, in our localities, because I think a lot more difference can be made in localities. I'll be honest with you. So, Kendra, as a teacher, boots on the ground in the classroom, you make all the difference. Folks who kind of have a wider view, I think Kendra said it before, it's really hard for you to enact any change here because you're not doing the work. But there is an awful lot of concern regarding book bans, different types of topics that may or may not be covered in standards. One year it is covered, the next year these standards have been thrown out.
Right.
We have a couple of states who've made national news because of that, some superintendents who were dismissed, because of these things. So I guess there is a lot of crap in the profession of education, and it is political. Even though I know as practitioners, it's very important that we try to remain as welcoming to all students as possible. Not to say that that's not political as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying that there's a lot of crap, to navigate in our profession that seems to be coming from the outside.
Yeah.
I think that when I think about that, just to kind of bring it, I think that people that like, I don't get bogged down by that. And I think it's just because I keep the number one thing, the thing, right? Like, My thing is to teach students something, and I don't even care if it's English, right? Like, I want them to feel safe. I want them to feel welcoming. I want them to know how that feels. I want them to see themselves. I want them to give them a voice. If they've never risen their hand, I want it to be the first time, because that's what creates change in the long run. It's not the literary devices, and it's the people skills and stuff
Mhm.
like that. That's what's the most important. So I think for me personally, and probably the people in my circles, because right, like you hang out with people that are in your circle because you don't want to like, you want people to talk about things that you agree with. But there are many times when I'm around people that we butt heads, and it's because they're not keeping the thing. And the
Mhm.
thing is that you got to leave with something. And I always, whenever I tell kids, like, I don't even care if like you even care about English when you leave here, because that's not the thing right now. It's like, what skills am I demonstrating to you? How am I leaving you a better person than when you walked in this room? And I think that if we keep the thing, everything else falls into place. I've never been worried about book bans. I've never been worried about policy, because I'm a rule follower. I'll do what I got to do to a certain extent, but also I'm going to have evidence and my reasoning, and I'm going to have a really strong claim if I want to challenge and rock the boat, because that's what good and educated people do. And so I think for me, to your point, like, how do we do it with all this other pressure coming in? You know, you always listen and talk about the plate. My plate is so full. I want to get rid of that, Tim. I have too many things on my plate. But you got to keep the thing, and you got to figure out what the thing is. And for
Mhm.
me, it's really has nothing to do with my content. It does have to do with graduating kids, because the second you put up any kind of roadblock for a kid to not graduate, you've cut them off from the world and from opportunities, and you've not invested in them one single second. So to me, you just got to keep the thing, and you got to figure out what the small thing is, and it can't be um, challenging every single thing that comes your way, because you're going to be burnt out in 2 seconds, and you're not going to be happy, and the kids are going to know you're not happy. And
Mhm.
then you're going to have a lot of family members knocking at your door because you're a sitting duck, because you've made everything your thing. So
Kendra,
that's
Yeah.
I
all I got
love
to
the
say.
thought too of, hey, if I'm going to come with a complaint and rocking the boat, I'm going to come with receipts.
Yeah. No, I think that's
I'm
very
coming with
smart
receipts, you know?
advice, right? And I like, Kendra, that you're leaving the thing open, right? That you got to figure out what that thing is for you, and invest in that and not worry about all the crap that's flying around. Dayna, any last words from you?
I'm going to go back to the investment piece, and I think that it's going to be about investment in getting kids interested, in getting educators interested, investment in making associations, investment in creating satisfaction. So slicing the dis piece off of the words in order to invest in our students, in our teachers, in our communities, is maybe what 2026 needs to be about. And how we get more people on board with that, I'm not quite sure yet. That might be my authentic, relevant, and larger community connected project
Hmm?
for the year.
Yeah, well, I think we were really fortunate tonight to have some people that are courageous enough to not give a shit, and I'll just say it, right? And that's part of what keeping the thing is finding your North Star and sticking with it no matter what's going on around you, whatever it is that drives you as an educator, right? I think it's been really great. Jessie, we haven't had a lot of people invoke the political questions. I'm glad that you did, right? Because that's a big part of the reality that's around us. Um, and Kendra, again, I really like that you're leaving it open for teachers to figure out what the thing is for them and then focus on keeping the thing, because I agree with you completely. Any attempt to try to get everybody on the same thing, right, is bound to lead to a lot of dissatisfaction, right? In politics, we sometimes talk about big tent parties, right? Like education is a big tent party, and there's room for a lot of different people. So I'm really grateful to both of you for disagreeing or being disagreeable in your own settings, in your own contexts, and for joining us for this tonight, because it was a really wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.